So welcome to this episode of History Hunters. I'm in Stockton Rural Cemetery. Now it kind of confused me because this is nowhere out in the rural part of the country, but at one time it was. This cemetery is full of incredible graves, some that I'm just now finding out about, including this guy behind me, Reuel Gridley. In 1864, Reuel Gridley was just a storekeeper. He gained national prominence when he decided to auction off a simple sack of flour for the United States Sanitary Commission. He raised $250,000 for the aid and benefit of wounded Civil War veterans. This simple marker right here, RCG, is actually the grave of Reuel Gridley right here. This is the grave of his wife, Susan Gridley, who died in 1910. She outlived him by 40 years. Quite an amazing monument here for him. And it says right there that the Grand Army of the Republic and Citizens of Stockton, September 19, 1887, in gratitude for services rendered Union soldiers during the War of the Rebellion in collecting $275,000 for the Sanitary Commission by selling and reselling a sack of flour. And way up there, you'll notice that Reuel Gridley has his hand on a sack of flour. It's interesting that there are hundreds of veterans' graves facing in an arched pattern toward the Reuel Gridley monument to the north. And as you can see here, there's a lot of graves of Civil War veterans. This is the grave of Civil War veteran Frank Lowe, and over here is that of H.B. Marshall. This is definitely a Civil War grave. That of A.R. McCall of the 91st Ohio Volunteers, who died in 1885. I think that's pretty cool because while I knew about Reuel Gridley, I didn't know that he was buried in the cemetery. Over in this plot, we have a Hollywood actress, believe it or not, Stockton, California. So right here on the Wilhoit plot, over here, this is the grave of Olympia Bradna. She actually performed in a Ronald Reagan film and also opposite George Raft. In fact, she was friends with Ronald Reagan when he was president. She was a pretty brunette, remembered for starring in several late 1930s films. She was born in Paris to a circus family that pushed her into show business from the time that she was a toddler, and she made her formal debut at age 8 and hit the deck. By 13, she was dancing with a famed troupe. She moved to the United States around 1935 and was signed to a Paramount contract, and in 1936 had parts in 3 Cheers for Love and College Holiday. She assumed her first major role in 1937 when she starred in The Last Train from Madrid and was to appear in several more films. She was a cover girl for several entertainment magazines. Her final film role came in 1941 when she starred with Ronald Reagan in International Squadron. You ask yourself, how did she end up here in Stockton, California? Well, this gentleman right here was a businessman, Douglas Woods Sr., and he was from Stockton. When she retired from films in 1941, she moved here with her husband to Stockton, and they lived here for a number of years until they moved to Carmel, I believe in 1968. And in 1995, they came back to Lode to be closer to family. She is not a household name nor a household face, but she was nevertheless a beautiful talent in Hollywood. She probably deserves more credit than she gets. I pretty much lucked out today because there's a tour going on. There's yellow balloons signifying where all the graves are, so it makes the job easier for me. So next we need to find Governor Budd. This structure right here is over the grave of a California governor, James Budd. It was easy to find. All you have to do is look for that structure right overhead. The 19th governor of California, James Budd, was born in Wisconsin in 1851 and died in California in 1908. His marker is over here, James H. Budd. He studied law and was also a major in the California National Guard. He was elected as a Democrat to the 48th Congress, serving from 1883 to 1885. He was elected governor of California in 1894 and served only one term. During the often bitter campaign for governor, Bud faced serious allegations that he had raped and impregnated teenage maid Nancy Neff in 1876. By then, both the baby and the mother had died, and Bud said the woman was like his sister and in no way took advantage of her. Despite the charges, Bud's campaign was a success. During his term of office, the Bureau of Highways was created and the Tahoe Wagon Road was built. He died at age 57. Not a lot of people know that Bud Lake in Yosemite National Park was named after him. I found the crypt of Benjamin Holt, who was an important person in Stockton history as well as the history of the United States, especially around World War I. He has a very large crypt made of, looks like granite. His inventions helped the United States during World War I. Involved tractors, steam-driven tractors. Behind these gates is the legendary Benjamin Holt. By the 1890s, with his partner Daniel Best as the Holt Manufacturing Company, he was making steam-driven wheeled tractors and harvesting machines for large farms. In 1906, he built, patented, and manufactured the first practical crawler-type tread tractor. During World War I, Holt tractors were used to replace horses to haul artillery and other supplies. Holt's inventions were also the inspiration for the development of British and French tanks during World War I. After World War I was completed, he focused less on agricultural machinery and more on road building machinery, all powered by steam. So right here, I found the grave of George Evans, who was a breveted brigadier general during the Civil War. So he was a native of Michigan. He first entered military service during the Mexican War when he went to serve with the Texas Rangers. When news of the gold rush reached back east, he decided to come out here from Texas, do a little gold mining. Mr. Evans decided to try his hand at politics, actually became the mayor of Stockton, and he also was elected to the California State Senate. In 1880, he decided that he was going to try to become the Republican nominee for governor of California, and he lost. He moved to San Francisco and became the harbor master over there. I found another significant grave, that of James Alexander Lode. He was a U.S. congressman from California. He was born in Louisiana in 1849. His parents brought him to Calaveras County, no doubt because of the gold rush. Eventually ended up settling here in Stockton, where he became a prosecuting attorney. He served in Congress from 1885 to 1887. James Alexander Lode died July 26, 1906. He was 57 years old. There we go again with 57 years old. I'm 58. These guys are making me feel like an old man. Ada was the beloved wife of James Lode. She died in 1884 at the age of 30. As they often do around the family plot, there's Lode's name. And then over here, here's the actual marker for James A. Lode from 1848 to 1906. Here's some tragedy for you. Their son, Willie Howard, died in 1883. He was just a year and a half old. Spent a couple hours out here already. It's been a very nice day. Still looking for some graves. Amanda Ringer died in 1907. She's a dead ringer. I happen to know a little bit about this gentleman. Lewis M. Hickman is buried here. A town in Stanislaus County is named after him. It's said that this mausoleum was designed similar to the church that he helped build, and which is still standing in Hickman, California. It's said it was inspired by a building that they saw in France. Hickman was a huge landowner, and in 1867 he served as the mayor of Stockton. I can tell you that I've lived in Hickman, and I honestly do not like the name of that town. In fact, I had suggested that they change the name of the town, and a lot of people got mad at me. But it just sounds kind of hickish. So right here is a grave that I want to focus on. It's that of Harry Cross. He was actually a doctor who delivered a lot of babies in this area of Stockton. He was traveling with one of his patients to a facility in Los Angeles for further treatment, and he stopped for the night along the old ridge route at the Sandberg Summit Hotel. During the night, somebody shot Dr. Cross right in the head and killed him. Nobody quite knows what happened. Oh, the secrets that cemeteries have. In this very sad, weed-choked lot, you'll see the name of P.S. Wilkes. He's actually buried right over here. This is the grave of Peter S. Wilkes. You can see that he died in 1900. He was a representative to the Confederate Congress from 1864 to 1865. I don't know a lot about him, but this entire family plot has been filled with bark, and it's got some weeds going here. So the grave back there is the Sperry family. Austin Sperry and his cousin Simon Sperry came out here from New Hampshire in the 1850s, and they saw all the wheat that was being grown here in Central California, and they decided that this would be a great place to start a flour mill. So they started Sperry Flour. Austin died in 1881 and left the entire operation to his cousin Simon until he died in 1886. As a side note, Simon's daughter Ethel married William Henry Crocker, son of the Big Four railroad magnate. And there you go, Simon Willard Sperry. So this ABS here is not the brake system, but it's the grave of Austin B. Sperry. So as a side note, when Black Bart robbed the stage at Funk Hill in the 1880s, he was actually wearing a Sperry flour sack over his head. So now I'm out to find the grave of a Confederate official that fought during the Civil War. Here we go with this wonderful little plaque stating this man was a Confederate veteran who served during the Civil War. Here's the grave of Colonel Dorsey. Caleb migrated with his family from Maryland to Missouri around 1835, and when his brothers left for the mines in California during the gold rush, Caleb ran the family farm until the Civil War broke out. He joined the Missouri Guard Cavalry under Sterling Price, and he commanded a regiment of Confederate soldiers at a battle near Mount Zion Church in Boone County, Missouri. On December 28, 1861, his forces were routed by less than 500 Union soldiers. On February 15, 1862, he was actually captured by Union forces at the Osage River in Missouri. A prisoner release was negotiated, and he was released, and he actually went back, and after promising not to fight for the Confederates, he fought again. After the South was defeated, Caleb moved to California, where he farmed in Oakdale with his brothers. Colonel Caleb Dorsey was shot and killed at the Snell Mine, approximately 15 miles northeast of Columbia, Tuolumne County. He was in a squabble with his partner, J.T. Newcomer. Dorsey was a hothead and liked to draw his pistol, and apparently the two of them got into a gun battle, and Mr. Dorsey lost. Mr. Newcomer's defense was that Dorsey was a hothead. Newcomer actually appealed this guilty verdict, and he was released from prison, but he was ostracized by the community, and in 1902 he committed suicide. This is what you call Millionaire's Row here. All lined up, pretty little tombs. It's crazy how much money that they spent on these. But you gotta know that these are all wealthy businessmen pretty much. Right over here is the mausoleum of Henry Brack. He lived from 1857 to 1941. He was a prime example of a rags to riches story. He came to California in 1849 with just 10 cents in his pocket. Through hard work and a few deals, he bought land west of Lodi, and eventually became the Brack's Tract at 10,000 acres. Most people don't even own a 10,000 square foot lot in the country anymore. He also raised cattle and grain and had his own ship for transporting the goods to San Francisco. He also founded a winery, and he also built the railroad between Lodi and Valley Springs in the foothills of California. This is the mausoleum of Charles Wagner, who died in 1917. His path to riches was establishing Pacific Tannery in 1856 and producing all kinds of leather products for this growing region. I think what's kind of interesting is how all these people thought they were building these lasting tributes to themselves, and as you can see here, it looks like these little spindles have been slowly disappearing. People have been breaking them off. Pretty grand mausoleums here on Millionaire's Row. We're going to go down here to the grave of Daniel Rothenbush, who lived from 1835 to 1906. Kind of surprised there's no bottles of beer out here, because in the 1850s he'd established the El Dorado Brewing Company, and for 102 years was producing a lot of beer for people around here. This is a mausoleum that you can actually walk into. It's the Daggetts. Almost looks like they're drawers that you can pull out and take a look at the caskets. As you can see, we're talking 1870s up here at John Daggett. That's incredible to think that right here are the bones of people that lived, oh my gosh, 1858 is when this one, Sarah Daggett, ended her life. You know, I think it's interesting how people think that in time that people are going to want to remember who they are. For the most part, people's memories of these people just disappears with time, and they become more and more irrelevant. So something caught my eye over here. This is crazy. That tree is just wrapped around that tombstone of mother, whoever her mother was, 1892, and twisted it right off of its base. I found the grave of Stockton police officer Henry Baker, who was killed walking home on October 17, 1894. The stone is engraved with a passage from Samuel, 1 Samuel. There is but a step between me and death, especially fitting given the fact that he stepped in front of one of those newfangled motor cars and was killed by it. I think this is one of the most interesting grave markers here in the cemetery, that of General David F. Douglas. He was born in Tennessee in 1821 and came to California in 1848 from Mexico, where he'd been fighting in the war. He was a member of the 1849 Constitutional Convention in Monterey. He helped build a school in the Linden area of San Joaquin County, where he owned a ranch. Right behind me is the grave of David Terry. He was the Chief Justice of the California State Supreme Court, but he was also somewhat of a criminal himself. He was probably best known for killing Senator David Broderick in a duel in San Francisco, because Broderick was not a Southern sympathizer, and David Terry was. When the Civil War broke out, Terry left California to join the Confederate Army and was commissioned an officer in the Texas Cavalry. After the war, Terry came back to California to practice law. One case that he took would lead to his own death. In 1885, Sarah Althea Hill hired Terry to serve as her lawyer in her case against ex-Senator William Sharon, claiming that she was his secret wife and wanted alimony. Terry took the case to the Supreme Court. The trial was a complete public relations disaster for Terry. At one point, there were some weapons drawn. Both Sarah and David Terry were arrested in the court. After he lost, he accused one of the justices, Stephen Field, of being bought off by Senator Sharon, and he had complete animosity. The threats that David Terry made against Justice Field got so out of hand that he had to hire a bodyguard to go along with him, and on the morning of August 14, 1889, both Terry and Field ended up at the Lathrop train station here in San Joaquin County. Mr. Terry went in, found Mr. Field there having breakfast, came up behind him and slapped him. Maybe he slugged him a second time. The bodyguard told him to halt. Deputy Marshal David Nagel pulled out his gun and shot Terry right in the chest and killed him. His client was his wife, Sarah Althea Hill Terry, who was buried right over here. It's believed that in 1880, 30-year-old socialite Sarah met millionaire Senator William Sharon, who was the owner of the Palace Hotel. At the time, he was a 60-year-old widower and one of the richest men in California. They became romantically involved, and it's been said he paid her $500 a month to live at the Grand Hotel next door to the Palace Hotel. Senator Sharon claimed that he had hired her merely as a mistress, but Hill claimed there was more to it, saying they were secretly married for 2 years. After husband David Terry was killed, she became obsessed with using mediums to contact him from the dead. Not only did she lose her money, but she lost her mind. At the age of 42, she entered the Stockton Mental Hospital, and she was there until she was 86 years old. So she spent 45 years of her life in a mental institution. While she was in the mental institution here in Stockton, she was under the false impression that she was in a mansion, that the hospital staff was actually her servants. She completely lost her mind. Such a fall from grace, being a San Francisco socialite, to the sad state that she ended her life in. She died in 1937 as just a broken woman. So we're going to leave the David Terry grave and come over here to the grave of his friend, John McMullen, who was a key person in the development of Stockton. Probably one of the grandest memorials here. John McMullen was born in Baltimore, Maryland, 1826, and at the age of 15, he left his home and he went to Texas to join what would become the Texas Rangers. There he met John Coffee Hayes, the commander of his unit, and also became a good friend of his. John Coffee Hayes was the inspiration for the Lone Ranger when Zane Grey wrote the novel The Lone Star Ranger. McMullen and Terry served in the Mexican-American War, and when that was over, they both came out here to California, enjoyed relatively good times. McMullen went from prospecting gold to becoming a cattle rancher and later a horse breeder. He was one of the first people to help organize the state fair here in California. I would imagine that serving in the Texas Rangers, you're kind of an aggressive hothead. I think that's what Terry was. He was once accused of beating up a newspaper editor over a story he thought was very slanderous, so he was taken to court. McMullen rose to his defense and testified in court to his character. And after hearing about Terry's character attacking people in the courtroom, I wouldn't put it past him that he attacked this newspaper editor. While McMullen helped Terry get off the charges, For the altercation, he did have to pay a $300 fine. He had built up a 28,000-acre ranch on which he raised 9 kids with Eliza. Typhoid fever took him out at the age of 44. It's said that his funeral was the largest procession that Stockton had ever seen, with over 100 carriages following the hearse to the rural cemetery. Wait till you hear about this character that I'm going to introduce to you. Over here is the grave of Russ Meyer, king of the nudies, as he proudly puts on his gravestone here. He was glad to do it. I bet he was glad to do it. Film producer and director. He spent World War II as a combat photographer in Europe. He got involved in professional photography, shooting some of the earliest Playboy centerfolds. The Immortal Mr. T's, a film that was shot in 1959, was the first nudie film that brought in over $1 million in revenue. His wife was Eve Turner Meyer, who was an actress and the June 1955 Playboy Playmate of the Month. She was also in a number of his films. She produced films with him, including Black Snake in 1973, The 7 Minutes, 1971, Cherry, Harry, and Raquel in 1970, and Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, 1970. Tragically, she was killed on March 27, 1977 in a plane crash over the Canary Islands. Now, she's not buried here. She's actually buried in the Sunnyside Baptist Church Cemetery in Spalding County, Georgia. Don't you feel sorry for him and the type of women that he found? So now I'm looking for the grave of San Joaquin County Sheriff Thomas Cunningham, who was involved in a number of celebrated manhunts involving such celebrated lawbreakers as Black Bart himself. Here's his grave, Cunningham. Over here it talks about the wife. His wife died in 1875. Sheriff Cunningham died in 1900 up in Tuttletown, which is in Calaveras County. This side talks about Thomas Cunningham being a native of Ireland, born on August 17, 1838. It says down here on the bottom, faithful toiler, thy work all done, beautiful soul into glory gone, virtuous life with the crown now won, God giveth thee rest. From 1872 to 1899, Thomas Cunningham, as Sheriff of San Joaquin County, played a part in every major manhunt in the state. He helped to track down men like Tiburcio Vasquez, one of the better-known Mexican bandits, to his hideout near Tejon Pass. He also happened to investigate the whereabouts of Black Bart, who was accused of 28 stagecoach robberies in California. There's a pretty cool picture of Cunningham, as well as Detective Harry Morris and Sheriff B.K. Thorne of Calaveras County, who posed with the strongbox that Black Bart pulled off the stage and the hatchet that he used to chop into the strongbox to get out the valuables. That robbery happened at Funk Hill. Actually, there were 2 robberies at Funk Hill conducted at the same location, 10 years apart. We highlight that in one of our prior videos shot a couple years ago. It's also said that he helped track down Evans and Sontag, the famous train robbers here in California, who was striking trains up and down the valley in the 1890s. So outside of the grave of this G.H. Castle, I see these throwbacks to another era. Horse hitch. Back to the days when people rode their horses into the cemetery, you had to hook them up to something, up to these rings here. And on the back here, it talks about where it was manufactured. My eye was caught by the sail on this tombstone over here. Captain J.B. Sears, born in Maine in 1834, died in California in 1897. He must have been a captain of one. It says, drop the anchor, furl the sail, we are safe within the veil. You don't see ships like that sailing on the seas anymore, do you? So after about an hour of searching, I finally found this Missouri governor. His grave says Governor John C. Edwards, 1804 to 1888. And it looks like over here, state of Missouri actually gave him this very distinguished headstone with the state seal. Indicates that he was governor from 1844 to 1848. There's a close-up of the seal of Missouri that they've provided on this gravestone. He was elected to the 27th Congress as a Democrat serving from 1841 to 1843. Just some of the accomplishments on his record: he introduced telegraph service to the state of Missouri, and 19 new counties were formed under his governorship. The Stockton Cemetery is a fascinating place. Most of the older gravestones bear witness that Stockton was populated by people from other states and other countries seeking better opportunities and probably better climate. By 1870, California had over 500,000 people. Today, nearly 40 million. Etched in stone are the young ages, proof that many of those early settlers mostly lived very short lives. I'm going to end this episode of History Hunters at the same place that I started, at the grave of Reuel Gridley. And I want to thank you for watching. Please give us a like, maybe a comment. We always appreciate new subscribers. Thank you so much.